Hello, people of the earth. Welcome to Hidden Knowledge of the Modern Times.
That's exactly the way I was going to start tonight. Hello, people of earth. Welcome to Hidden Knowledge of the Modern Times. The date is November 23rd.
No.
What's the date?
Incorrect. Incorrect.
Alright, let me introduce myself.
24th.
I, of course, am Samael. This is Amman.
Hello.
You know us if you've been looking at this channel a little bit. Today we're going to talk about magic and its origins. So this is probably going to be a really in-depth conversation for all of us here. We have a new special guest here, Laura Lee, right? A unicorn. So at that, let's go ahead and let me switch to the camera with everybody on it, and we will see our new special guest.
Wait a second. Things are starting to make a little more sense.
There you go.
Okay, so Dylan, go ahead and say hello. Spooky Skeleton Man.
Hi.
Great introduction.
Fantastic.
Absolutely flashy.
What a time to be alive.
Ephraim,
Hello.
how are you today?
Hi.
How's the Mushroom Kingdom?
It's destroyed.
Oh no! What happened?
Trip balls and ate the whole thing.
Oh no, man!
It sucks, man. The whole thing grew within years and thousands of years, and I was reigning over the kingdom, and all of a sudden some guy came along and swooped it up. Woo! Trip balls. Yeah, actually, he died.
Oh, too
Well,
much.
you know.
Was he married?
Come on, this.
He was this black guy with a huge afro and the star glasses with like visors in between them, and he had nail polish on.
Was it Paranormal?
No, it's really weird.
Hey, it happens, man. But welcome to the show. We appreciate you being here.
Is it cool if I crash here for a little bit, Spooky Skeleton Man, and just grow right there?
Yeah, man. It's all you.
Cool, man.
I heard you're a fun guy.
You got to start the kingdom back.
I am a pretty fun guy.
He's up here.
Where's the canned laughter?
Go ahead.
Oh, you know.
Alright, so
The color's like a laughing all of us.
A genuine one.
Laura Lay, you're our new special guest here, so go ahead and introduce yourself.
What is that?
Very cool. And you are a unicorn, are you not?
Yes.
Okay, glad to have you on the show. You guys are really rare, so I feel very honored to have you here.
Right?
You should feel on.
Where's your horn?
It retracts.
Oh, yeah?
They're shapeshifters, just like dragons.
Oh,
Don't be
Ah,
offensive, please.
Yes.
Oh shit. Oh shit.
That's like the identifying feature, man. I just wanted to know what happened to it.
You can't just walk around with your horns sticking out.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's like walking
Yeah, right,
on water, you know?
Well, you gotta let that freak flag fly, you know?
Imagine if some guy was like, there's that one guy who's like, and then he just like goes back to normal form again.
Alright.
So do that one more time, Ephraim.
Nice.
Very cool. Rem, all I can see is your shins.
How do they look?
They are beautiful shins.
Well, I am more than.
Very nice shape.
They're actually quite good looking.
Are you more than your shins?
You know, ladies, I am so much more than my shins. Please stop objectifying my freaking whatever bones these are.
We get a lot of
I
comments
refuse
about
to
your
stop
shins,
objectifying
Rem.
you, Rem.
I'm more than just these bones.
Last week, you wouldn't believe how many comments we had about where are the shins.
Well, there's been a bit of a deficiency in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's been a bit dry.
It was a big controversy.
Oh man, I'm sorry.
They said the
about
show
that.
wasn't as good.
And they must have. I'm glad they're getting their daily dosage now. You know.
It's a good, yeah.
Steven,
Hey, what's up?
go ahead, introduce yourself here.
Hi, I'm Steven. I'm sure you see me around. So yeah, I'm not really that interested.
Are you You're a human, I recall, right?
I am a
Steven,
human.
the regular
Yes,
human.
Absolutely. I'm not really that interesting. You know, you see me reading, writing, playing with stones.
You have your own camera sometimes, so I wouldn't say you're not interesting.
I do have my own camera sometimes. Do I have my own camera at night?
No.
Oh. So not
We're
tonight.
sharing it. We're sharing it with these lovely people.
Yep.
You've invited them into
Absolutely.
your camera space.
You know, I'm just talking. So, yeah. Really, yeah. I'm just, you know, reading up, you know, Crystal Bible. Reading up on rocks. Playing with some rocks.
Rocks are cool, man.
Yeah.
I love
absolutely.
Everybody loves rocks.
Rocks.
All right. Well, you know, we're talking about a very interesting topic that's very close to my heart tonight, and I know that a lot of people here feel very strongly about this topic. So, Jason, why don't you go ahead and introduce us to what we're talking about this evening?
Well, tonight we're talking about magic and its origins, the beginnings of magic and the beginnings of people and when they started doing magic, and what magic really means, what it is, how it works, etc. So we're going to start off with the statement, in the beginning there was nothing, right? So magic is all about creation. It's all about diverting the creative forces of the universe, right? Into something specific.
I think so. I think it's about, like if you were in a river and you put a big piece of wood in the river, now the current goes off in this direction and it creates a vacancy behind the wood. So now you have a flow of the current. In my opinion, that's how magic works. You create an intentional flow. You say the flow is going to go here and it's going to produce this effect no matter the consequence. And I'm going to get the consequence or coincidence, really, that I want. And then the coincidence occurs by natural means. So I think that's a pretty understood concept about magic, is that you set your intention out in the universe and then you get a coincidental implication or situation that the thing that you intended to happen coincidentally occurs. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the basic fundamental property of magic. And of course, if you were trying to apply that to science, you would say, oh, there's no way I can prove that, because it goes along with living as a conscious being. So magic itself is a hard thing to bottle up because it produces only coincidence. But the power to influence coincidence is an incredibly powerful one, because you can use coincidence for anything. So I think really we need to ask, where did we first discover the idea that we could manipulate coincidence in our favor? Why did we originally have that thought?
Maybe someone just wanted it that badly and tried to do stuff like they thought about the forces of nature and the forces of the world and like decided maybe if I kill this cat right now my wife won't leave me or some shit like that.
Well,
but
animal sacrifice.
10,000-year-old analog.
Animal sacrifice is a really interesting concept, because what is the point? How did we discover that? If I killed this animal with an intention that I'm going to get what I want?
So, from a philosophical standpoint, my idea of what I believe magic is an action with an intent. So it is to put out into the world to retrieve response, if that makes sense.
What do you mean?
So it's like, I think I feel like belief has a lot to do with magic, and I feel like the reason the belief has to do with magic is because like you're so dedicated on getting this cause that your perception of like these supernatural forces like helping me help drive your psychology to get something in response. I also think it has to do with the psychology of other people around you and how you put out in the world and you essentially, it's like I want something to happen, so I am going to put out an action, no matter how large or small that action may be, to get the world around me or myself to respond in a certain way to get a certain thing to happen.
So let's say that like you decide, I want to do a ritual so that I meet a hot tall blonde at a bar. right? So you do the ritual, you go through like an hour-long process that you created, your own personal one, whatever you did. And then the very next day, you notice all the tall, hot blondes at the bar that you go to, whichever one it is. But you notice them more acutely because you've done this ritual and your psychology has been affected in such a way where you will notice tall, hot blondes more often because you spent an hour the day before focusing entirely on tall, hot blondes.
Well, let's talk about for a moment what a
That's
ritual
out of actorship
actually
order.
is. What is a ritual?
I mean,
Rim, did you had something? You had something
We
to
can
add
all
to
answer
that?
I was gonna say, is there a name for that concept in psychology where you notice something that you're focused on more often, kind of?
Confirmation bias.
yeah,
Is that confirmation bias?
that is
It
confirmation
is.
bias.
Very cool, very cool.
Yeah, it's called confirmation bias.
Alright.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, what is a
Yes.
ritual?
Oh shit.
Yes, the confirmation bias is a real thing.
Mm.
Tony Robbins actually does it to a whole group of people to notice a certain color, and they're noticing it more. And they might even say, if someone says notice red, they might even like that maroon's red, just to.
Right,
see.
I've heard it. I've heard one example of it before in the book. You get a new car. Let's say you got a Nissan Sentra. Then you start noticing, wow, there's Nissan Sentras everywhere. You just start seeing them everywhere.
Right,
I mean,
like
nothing
when you
changes
learn a
how
new
it-
word.
Yeah, you start noticing more. It's like it's not that those weren't already all there. It's just now that you're seeing them.
First of all, Nissan Sentra.
Is that actually what you drive?
That's what we both read.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
How did
If I focus on Ferrari, then I'm going to start seeing a lot of Richie.
Now,
Yeah, but it won't be
Actually, hold
relevant,
on.
unfortunately.
what he just said, so he
Okay.
just said, I might want to try to get a Ferrari. So if you put
Okay.
your intent and focus fully on getting that Ferrari, you're going to end up getting that Ferrari. If that is your goal and that is your dream, and that is your full intent.
You will be on the path toward that for sure. Your mind, yeah. So eventually,
I don't want a Ferrari, that's too expensive.
I want a Nissan Sentra sometime.
Okay, so the original, I guess, seed of a ritual is focus and attention, or your consciousness focused on something. So there are natural laws at play in the universe and around us. So Brian Tracy talks about how if something happens once, it's a coincidence. If something happens more than once, there's a natural law at play. You just may not be aware of that law.
I think so too. I think coincidence could occur naturally, but I think that coincidence and purposeful coincidence are occurring with probably equal regularity. That coincidences occur meaningfully maybe 50% of the time, and then non-meaningfully 50% of the time. So I think it hides itself within that coincidence. I think that coincidence itself is a tool which is really unexplored within the field, and that magic inherently works with these concepts of coincidence.
Yeah, it's like manipulating statistics, right? Like,
It is manipulating probability.
let's say that somebody was so tall, hot blondes, right? Let's say that there's like maybe like going back to the same. I don't even like blondes, honestly. I'm just using them as an example. So, tall, hot blondes. You're at a bar, right? And there's a higher saturation of tall, hot blondes that night for no reason, but there's a chance, right, that tall, hot blondes show up at this bar. Maybe they're like 20% of the clientele. But for some reason this night, there's like 40% of the people in the bar are all tall, hot blondes. And it's all because of your ritual, supposedly, but it could all, it's perceived as coincidence.
Yeah, but the coincidence occurred because you did a ritual the night before is remarkably coincidental, right? So now we're getting into a field where what is the ratio that you put your intention the night before, and now suddenly you get a bunch of like tall hot blondes the next night. That coincidence itself is almost astronomical.
But people call that magic.
So
That is what
You're
magic is.
absolutely right,
That's crazy, man.
Dylan.
Crazy.
I think the core universal principle at play, which I'm not really sure how to define, I've only actually really read the principle in the book, and it made sense to me at a point, but when I tried thinking deeply into it, I don't know how to explain how the principle exactly operates. Essentially, I think this principle is when you set out to find something, or you're looking for something, and you have your mentality locked on something, the universe corresponds to your absolute wants and needs. Not just like, I simply want something. It's something that you have to truly want and have to convince your perception that it is something that you truly want. And I think that's essentially what magic focuses around.
Yeah.
He has an absolutely good point. Actually, that is the main, just like meat of magic, is the power behind the intention.
Yeah, power of intention.
So when you're coming into a ritual, you have components, but components are kind of frivolous once you realize that the real power is coming from you. We work through the senses, so you use the components just to please the senses, just to get the mind to focus. But if you can do it without the components, it's ideal because you're not distracted and you can fully focus on what it is you're setting. Ritual, writing paper, candles, all that stuff, it really is just to help you focus and nothing more. There's sure plants and different substances have a certain vibration to them, but the main power is coming from you. And so he was pointing to something really strong in a universal principle, which is the real form of money in the universe is energy. So the real form of currency throughout the whole entire universe is just an exchange of energy. So you're putting energy towards a focal point, and it is responding in kind. So it's like a trade, but it's just intangible.
I can kind of agree with you there. A lot of the things that we incorporate into ritual to do magic is just there to lay concrete ideology, or I don't know how to put it, philosophy, to make what we're thinking about real. And that, I have the candle and the candle is burning and it's burning with my intention, but ultimately that entire process comes from me. And the will that I'm exercising over the universe is what causes certain things to occur within the universe. Those coincidences follow my intention.
So from the psychological standpoint of it, I think that the most important factor at play, just anything involving magic, is essentially the human perception. I think the human perception is like, well, to describe it, the human perception is made up of essentially all your past experiences, everything. It contains like all your knowledge, and it's basically like your opinions, your views of the world, and everything. And your perception ultimately drives you. It drives your focuses and essentially like what you want to get out of life. It holds your values. And understanding like the world corresponds to your perception because you respond to your perception, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the human perception is essentially what the psychology of magic revolves around.
Fantastic.
What's the next point there, Jason?
Well, we actually just reached the fourth point. We've naturally progressed through the first four, but are there consequences to all this?
Are there consequences to
that? Is actually the next one. Are there consequences to all of this?
I think the big question here is like, let's say we use magic and we do black magic on people, right? Mm-hmm. We get them to fall into a situation where they do harm unto themselves. Mm-hmm. So is there consequences for us for having exuded that influence over the universe to produce that negative coincidence for that person?
So I kind of look at it like, I only recently realized this last night. Karma is kind of like a subtotal zero system. You're always going to end up with subtotal zero of what you get. The energy you put out is equal, the energy you take in is equal to the energy that you put out. So, and that is one of the universal principles, and is essentially the principle of balance. And I think it really comes down to morals. if I do something wrong to someone and they do not rightfully deserve that wrong, in some way what goes around comes around. So say I'm like involved in a situation where I decide I'm gonna go, I'm gonna go do, in a sense you can see drama as magic, like trying to force drama to happen is a sense of chaos magic.
Yeah.
So I want to go and screw up this little friend group. I'm creating this hypothetical situation.
Sure.
Okay.
I want to go destroy this friend group just because, like, I want to stir up drama because I am a black magician. And I'm going to go destroy this friend group by starting a rumor. The rumor is the magic. It's the initiative of action with the intent. So I'm going to start this rumor about friend X, and it's going to spread around this group, and it's going to like separate them. Well, what's coming back to me is essentially wow. So I think what comes back to me is like missing out on the opportunity to make friends, for one. I'm not making friends, but also I think eventually if I continue on with my behavior, or in some way my behavior will be noticed and people will notice and they're going to shun me and I'm going to get shit for it, right?
I guess so. I guess you could see the implication of that being that you suffer ill consequences as a result of what you intended to exist.
Right. It seems like you would.
It feels like you would, but I feel like personally I'm to a point where I realize that you can send these things out, and I think we had talked about this previously with Triton, and we had referenced the idea that by creating a negative circumstance for them, we offer them a positive vacancy to grow within. And so really what you think you're doing with black magic, you're inflicting harm on somebody, you're really giving them an opportunity to grow and become more positive and to adapt to these circumstances in their life that would be otherwise detrimental to them, which we've all gone through.
I think that goes more than just
There's a certain
magic
circumstance
itself,
I'd like to bring up, but I probably shouldn't.
I mean, it's basic physics, guys. Every action has a reaction.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so actually everyone's touched on a concept that is really old, and sometimes people misunderstand karma just from pop culture memes and stuff.
You're absolutely right, I think.
So he touched on it being a more personalized
The cover
person.
chorus.
He talked about physics.
Hold on.
Those are definitely correct.
Can we wait for the sirens to pass
Oh,
by?
that's good. That is a good.
We do modify. We do after processing and separate too. So,
I don't understand.
my God.
Yeah, we can cut this part if we really want to, but it's not entirely necessary.
It's real life.
Yeah, right. Someone's getting got right now.
All right, it's valid. Okay.
Got it as
Yeah, go ahead.
If
Yeah, we're all
If you
listening.
go back to the origins of karma as a law, the ancient origins of it and the yogic culture, you'll find that which ties into magic is karma begins inside yourself, and then whatever is in the micro, the macro, whatever inside is also out in the universe. So inside you create blockages from the things that you do based off of your beliefs. Belief is actually what powers karma at the end of the day.
Yes.
If you believe hard in your heart because you were conditioned that way that what I'm doing is bad,
Ooh.
you will bring it right to you because you believe in your heart. So once I understood this concept, I started to release like guilting myself over certain mistakes or certain things I did, and I noticed that I was no longer drawing to me what people would consider a karmic effect. So now that does not mean that I'm oblivious in my action.
I've actually been practicing that recently.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's amazing understanding that concept. However, on a larger scale, you've got this cosmic force that is always exchanging energy. So I like what you said about an opportunity, seeing opportunity. That's amazing. Because there is
Yes.
always some exchange happening. for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you create a hardship circumstance for somebody, obviously they're going to be able to grow and adapt to those hardship circumstances. So really, I mean, if you wanted to look at it that way, you could create a negative circumstance for that person and allow them to realize why doing that action was negative to themselves, and grow beyond it and say, next time I won't do that because there was a negative consequence to that. So I've been entertaining that idea a lot recently, is that when you do black magic, you inherently are creating an opportunity for somebody else to adapt and overcome those circumstances so that they realize the harm that they've inflicted by their actions. So what you're doing is really taking that situation and saying, this is something that somebody really needs to learn from. And by having no consequence and no action at the end of it, they're not going to learn anything. So I'm taking the universe's karmic process into my own hands, and I'm saying, this is something that they need to learn the lesson for, and they need to move on. So we're using our will and our intention to inflict on that person a circumstance which allows them to grow and to get over that barrier.
I feel like that concept that you just brought up kind of harkens back to the idea of like a witch's curse, where like somebody does some old woman harm and then she's like, well, fuck you, I'm gonna burn all these candles and you're gonna turn into a... Yeah.
Sorry. We went into that in another episode.
Yeah.
I think this is a huge factor of karma, but I don't think this is the completeness of karma. A few episodes we talked about how hell was a place that was self-imposed.
Yeah. Maybe.
So hell is a place that's self-imposed was basically meaning like, okay, I go out and I harm someone in some physical way. The police are going to come after me. I'm going to get in trouble for it. You know, that too is a form of karma. That you are getting what
consequences of your actions.
Consequences of your actions. Yes. Now, I also think that another part of karma, we're all looking at the negative concept of karma, but there is a positive concept of karma, that when you do good things happen. And I think that this also goes into heaven is a place that's self-imposed. When I do good, people are going to like me. They're going to, I'm going to attract good people around. But I also think that it also goes into the mental psychology aspect of karma, how we were talking about that, like we said in the negative sense, like, sorry, Brainford, you were saying that karma is like...
We can have will over karma.
Essentially, yes, but it's like you're doing it to teach someone else a lesson, or
Sure.
give someone else an opportunity to grow.
You're telling the universe, do this lesson to them.
What if, like, you've been good enough that the universe gives you a freebie? It so coincidentally, like, does the Tao solid, so that's just, like, that's a net balance 0. So I think that's another, like, huge positive factor of karma.
Like, you've done a bunch of great things, and then you do one terrible thing, the universe is like, we'll let you off for that, man. You understand what you've done.
Yeah.
Well,
I
that's
terrible.
No.
I would say you think that you taking your will and making a bad circumstance for somebody else is a bad thing to do. And so you're saying, okay, well, this is going to have a consequence for me. But really, you're just taking what already occurs in the universe and you're saying, okay, let's make somebody have a lesson which teaches them that they shouldn't do the thing that I exercise my will with.
Right.
Wait a second.
I wouldn't say that that's exactly the same thing as doing a bad thing. I wouldn't say that doing black magic is inherently a bad thing. What would you say about this?
I don't like using the terms black or white magic because it's frivolous and silly and it doesn't really exist.
I
Dark
completely
gray and light
agree.
gray,
Yeah,
lighter gray, and
All right,
slightly darker
hold on,
gray.
hold on.
I really don't like
You
all
made a
these
good point.
all these
You made a very
labels.
good point about this creating your own heaven and hell. That is true to a certain extent. Chico Xavier is a well-known psychic who channeled a lot of people from the other side, and he had some very interesting things to write from these beings he was channeling about the other side. It starts with how you feel about yourself. So if you, the inner judge of yourself based off of your conditioning says, you have been bad and you feel the guilt of it, you go to that place based off of your own, it's another dimension, based off of your own like guilt trip and your own like wrongness and goodness. Further than that though is even if you are pretty good person, if you have a lot of anger and you have a lot of intention, again, here, intention's so important, you're still going to go to the bad place or the darker place because you held that in your body. So karma, that the consequences that you would get from any intention setting, which could be considered magic, is definitely going to start inside with what you're carrying inside of you. So if what you were saying about this person's got to pay for what they've done, I have felt a calling from higher beings to enforce that with the power that I have, and I roll with it. I roll with whatever I'm asked to do, and sometimes people do need to serve for what they've done. And if it happens to unfold in front of me and it's not too much trouble, you know, I might dish it out if I'm asked to do that by higher beings. But it's not like I'm doing it all the time. I'm doing it when I'm called to do it, and I feel like they're going to get a lesson from it.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
When you feel like something is unjustified in its consequence, right? Somebody does something heinous, and then you say, with the popular assumption of karma, right? Oh, where is their consequence? Where is the consequence for their bad action, right? Now I jump in and I say, okay, well, somebody needs to learn from this. They cannot treat people like this. I feel like that's completely justified to go out into the universe and say, okay, well, my will is producing something, and I say they need to suffer a consequence from this. It's something that the universe in its grand spectrum has missed. And not intentionally, but just because it's too small scale or whatever.
Well, technically it hasn't missed if you saw it.
Exactly. No, I completely agree.
You are the universe perceiving itself.
You are the universal instrument for that karmic retribution. And so if you choose to do nothing, then nothing happens. But if you choose to enforce the consequence with that, then is when the karmic process really kicks in as we think it to be popularly. Is that you get them a consequence which they deserve from their actions. So it's a really
coincidentally induced, or even if it wasn't like intentionally induced by whoever was harmed, or if it wasn't because of what harm was done. If it's just like some roundabout way of what goes around comes around, that's still karma.
Yeah, thank you. I was gonna say
The whole thing for a while.
Yeah, I almost lost it too. I was just gonna say, like, what we say here about us making the reality of changing somebody, or we make the decision and think of it as in they're going to grow, so I'm going to just do this anyway. That's kind of the same thing that Joseph said 2 weeks ago about selfishness isn't a wrong thing because they're going to grow from it. And I was thinking, and I told him, I said, why does selfishness have to be like that if you only think about yourself in that moment? You know what I'm saying? And you're thinking about harming that person, you don't think about them growing. That's you justifying the fact that you're trying to do something to them that's not right. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, you can justify anything you do to make yourself look like a fucking hero.
That's true, though. That is true.
that's the confirmation bias right there.
Oh, okay.
You're using confirmation bias to make yourself either a hero or a villain. And if you make yourself a villain and you do a certain act of magic as a villain, then you're going to get villainous consequences.
If you do it as a hero, though, still doing the wrong thing, I feel like there's still consequences. Like selfishness, like I was talking about with Joseph. Sorry,
No, it's all good. This is relating to your thing.
Of course. And I was saying to Joseph, I was like, hey, Joseph, how come selfishness always leads to a consequence when you're thinking about yourself? And he says, well, it doesn't. And then I said, well, every selfishness leads to one thing to the next. It doesn't go straight to the end where you get HIV from only focusing on yourself, having as much pleasure from sex as possible, and getting as many women involved. It's like that concept. And then smoking.
It's all about blondes, man.
You know, sorry, but it's just there's always some consequences to our own selfish pleasures and us trying to get what we want out of something.
Yeah, like everything costs something, and if you're only receiving things from the universe, you got to put something back out, and that's something back out. I mean, if you're taking advantage of people, you're gonna end up, getting taken advantage of, or you're gonna end up getting fucking.
But what if that thing you want to put back
You have
out
to give something back.
isn't what's creating balance?
So, I have a very important philosophy on this. This philosophy is selfishness through selflessness. Understand that it is just simply human nature to have interest in taking care of yourself. That is just simply, part of our nature. And I look at it like you can do selfish things and still have selfless results. Like it was like the positive part of karma I was talking about. Like I decide, oh, these guys, need a place for their podcast, and I make a good group of friends because of it, and now I got a good group of friends. That's positive karma.
Right.
So it's like that's selfishness through selflessness in a way. Like
it's kind of like how
personal for what I'm putting out.
if somebody
And
were
it's
to start,
benefiting somebody else in the same way. So actually, love, that's an important, I think, part of magic. If anyone's ever read the book Alchemist by Paul Coelho, it mentions that in alchemy, love is viewed as the force which evolves all things because of this principle. It's like you put love out into the world, I give something love, and it benefits me in return. Love is something that benefits both parties and nobody has to lose from it. It's what breaks the karma system. So it's like you're always going to get something positive back for exactly what you give out, but it's also doing something good for something else. And I think that's referred to in a symbolic way as alkahestry, which is a pure substance which dissolves whatever is given into it.
I think you're bringing up a really valid point, is that I've explored this topic a lot recently, but the idea of selflessness versus selfishness, and when you introduce the idea of mutual benefit into that, then those ideas become very gray.
Yeah, like I was about to make a point about how if somebody were to start a business, right, and the business is so they're hiring these employees, and the employees have a very easy job to do. Let's say that they only work like 30 hours a week and they get $20 an hour, and that's good for anybody. And let's say that they start this business, but they're making a lot of profit off of this business, whatever the fuck it is. This is a hypothetical thing. But these people are still living decent, lower middle class lives that are working for him, and this guy's living way up here. Is that guy doing something wrong by not sharing those profits more than he is?
Oh, yeah.
Because they're doing easy jobs for easy money and making more than the average person working a hard job for low money, like let's say like a fucking assistant manager at Wendy's. Like,
Yeah.
Well, he's contributing to a system that isn't well balanced. I think has a certain amount of consequences, but it seems to be more of like a spiral that affects more people.
Sorry. There's a tipping point.
Ooh.
It's like when one person starts hogging so much resources, it's taking away from someone in a lesser position than them.
Yeah.
So like by hogging so many resources and collecting more money than you really need and not giving out, it actually affects the economy, and that affects the people that are in lower classes, and the lower classes get pissed off and they want to start something against like hogging all these resources. That's the natural balance.
like the guillotines in the French Revolution.
Now, what you're talking about is really going into the ethics of it, though. Is debating the morals of whether or not why it's wrong, which is I personally think is a little bit off topic going into the ethics of that. But
Yeah.
as far as it goes, like I really think that there is a tipping point that if the system, in order to continue to exist, like just as we do, like if our lives are in danger, we will kick into survival mode to do anything that we can to exist. And I think the system, being the universe around us, in some way seeming to be alive, responds to the tipping point, the point that this could cause mass harm, mass extinction, or mass,
suffering in some way.
Suffering at some point, right. So I think in order to keep itself, the system to keep itself going and keep itself functioning and keep itself heading towards the direction of evolution, it adjusts itself back into balance accordingly.
I would say so, because I couldn't imagine a system, so far as what we've observed, that wouldn't correct itself to be balanced. And so when we threaten the planet with no life, I would imagine that it comes back and says, well, we should be in a situation where you guys do exist.
Right,
because
like we're in right now.
Right. I mean, that's exactly what we're in right now, 6th mass extinction. And to me, it's a very valid concept, I think, to explore. The idea that the planetary energy itself wants to correct us onto a course where we are doing the best that we possibly can for ourselves. And
like, does the Earth itself have a consciousness or a soul?
I think so. It must, as a planet. If we do, I think obviously the planet does.
So here's the thing about also that survival system. It is also kind of like, we were talking about the Tao earlier, it's also kind of what sets the direction of the unfolding. Because it's like, here we have a crisis of global warming and issues about climate change and all this kind of stuff alarming us. And well, now because this issue is present and this issue is threatening, we humans, we start responding to it and try to stop the crisis and fix the process. But along that, we start looking at ourselves and we start wondering, it's kind of like the whole looking at myself and wanting to grow, that I have to look inward. It's like, now we're going to start looking at like better energy resources and stuff like that, and that starts a revolution to evolve more.
I hope so. I desperately actually
Right, there's a
hope
lot
so.
of people on that train right now.
Yes, and
there's
I
a
feel
lot
like
of intention in
it's
the idea that we should change the way that we live, especially for the past like 150
Yes,
years.
I think that it's growing and growing, and a lot of us in growing generations are starting to realize that we cannot live on this planet with the old world mentality. And the old world mentality is going to lead to our destruction. So we must adopt, and very quickly, a real and meaningful existence going into the future.
Right,
That
like
we
every
cannot.
single car company right now should offer the option to switch the car that you have right now for free to an electric motor.
Well, electric is okay, but you have to think, where does the electricity come from? Does it come from a nuclear power plant? Probably
I've
not.
been wondering that myself. Is an eco car really more efficient?
Because the electricity still comes
Yeah.
from probably a coal producing plant. So the electricity that you put into your car is probably still in the vein of producing carbon emissions for the planet.
So I feel like with that, we're kind of
The
getting
grid needs
a
to
little
move
bit
too.
into climate change. I kind of want to like go into one other thing here about how this the system in balance regards to, well, I guess the system around us. But essentially, it's like we enlightened people, people who understand the functionality of the system, we are very interesting because we act in a certain extent outside of what is normally acted within the system. It's like people who don't understand how the system works or really have an interest in understanding how the system works function mostly based on their instincts and their responses, and that is what keeps them in line with the system. So it's like fear is a natural human instinct. Fear of extinction is the reason. Like,
it's the motivator.
It's the motivator. Exactly.
Like, how do most people end up as an assistant
Exactly.
manager at Wendy's?
Exactly. So I think like essentially the difference between the magical performer and the people, or the magical performer and the people who don't necessarily ask questions and want to just live the simple life within the system, I essentially think is just, I think it's that whole knowledge of perception that we were going into earlier. Just a bit of knowledge that your perception is entirely your choice and that life is a game of lenses. You choose how you want to look at the world, and I think that's what sets apart the magician from the civilian.
I need better listening skills. I'm sorry. I got a slow brain. I got a really slow brain. Big words.
It's okay.
I feel like we should move into a segment here.
Yeah, feel free.
What are you
to,
talking about here?
Feel free to ask questions because it's good, like someone outside of the perspective of Magic to ask questions.
I'm fully outside of it. I'm not involved in it, not in the way that you're talking about it, of course. Well, I mean, as you guys know, I dabble with Magic with the CN.
What kind of questions do you have, Rem?
Okay. Well, you guys mentioned earlier how you guys were, okay, I was thinking about one thing. Is it possible to avoid confirmation bias? We're always looking for, some way to answer things, some way to justify things, right? So are we always using confirmation bias?
You can avoid it in Magic by just literally just thinking about what makes me schizophrenic.
Okay.
What makes me have non-realistic expectations about how the world will work, and when you start thinking about synchronicities too often, that's when you should be worried. You start thinking about like
you're reading into things too much, and then
like this guy I just met's brothers has the same name as my brothers, so that means that they must be fucking
reading
soul
a little too much into things.
Connected or something.
So
reading into things too much.
Yes.
I think the thing that avoids the confirmation bias personally is understanding the Tao. Like really, that's really what did it for me. Like I was actually stuck on something because of it, but understanding that there is a direction of which all things head and that you still have free will is like you don't have to deeply look into why. Don't try to ask yourself why is this happening, why is this happening.
Right.
When you start reading into that too much, you go into this hole of trying to get things to happen that are already happening.
Dylan, let me ask you something. What is the Tao?
That was exactly what I was going to ask. What is it?
So the Tao, you can imagine it. Is this mandala on camera?
Go ahead.
So the Tao,
Teo.
the center of the mandala, you can imagine as the Tao, and the flower around it is like reality. The reality we are experiencing, the explosion that we are following. It's like the force. So the force heads. So you have like the dark side and the light side of the force, right? But the dark side and the light side are pulled by the force itself.
Yeah.
There is good and evil, but there is the Tao. And the Tao is essentially an evolution towards purity. Evolution only goes in like one direction. And when I say evolution, I'm talking evolution of everything. Biology, geology, like silver evolves into gold eventually.
Natural.
When we're unhappy with our lives, we want to evolve ourselves into a better state of living. I say that ultimately the whole purpose of humans in this universe, how they connect to everything, is that the purpose of humans is simply to the whole reason why we exist is to make existence better. It's like when we're unhappy with something, we do something to try to fix it.
Right,
This is like how I was talking about, like, love evolves all things are going in one direction. When I give to you, like, love is what breaks karma. Love is what breaks karma is because when I do good, it not only does good for me, but also does good for you. And this evolves towards purity. We only go in one direction. You can imagine the Tao like the flow of time. And in Taoism, it is explained as water, and imagine like water. Like I like to describe it and try to keep a sense on my grounding of reality when I use magic to imagine my life like water. If I feel like the currents are very, very flush and moving very hard, it means that I am rushing things. I am in a very, very fast motion and I need to slow down. I need to take a breather. The healthy, calm, and relaxed state of mind, the mind that is at peace is the mind that is in flow with the river, and the mind that is in flow with the Tao.
You know what I like to think of as the Tao?
Okay.
If I were to meditate until I died, would that be a less meaningful existence than somebody who lived it out into the idea of their fullest existence?
That's a really good question.
If my fullest existence was meditating until I died, is the experience any different?
Well, did you talk about it? Did you talk to people about what you meditated about?
I
Did you
feel
try
like
to
you-
spread your wisdom?
Does talking to other people about what you've experienced in your life influence how
I think
meaningful your life was?
The knowledge.
I think so.
The
I
knowledge
think
of
so.
having impacted someone's life could be that could influence you positively. High value.
So, yes, it still impacts everything
Big
around.
ones.
You are connected to everything, so if you meditate for the rest of your life and don't ever talk to anyone, you are still affecting the collective, period. You don't necessarily need to make a physical, like, in-person impact on someone. And it just is. It's not good or bad or, you know, any of those words. It just is. And if that's what you choose to do with your experience, you're still adding to the collective. So obviously, if you meditate for the rest of your life and you're peaceful, you're bringing that peaceful energy to the collective, which is
You're
great.
definitely giving off good energy, but you're not making
Right,
as much
there-
of an impact as you
I
could.
like.
There's entire
what-
temples dedicated to this kind of. Sorry, there's like entire temples where people they're never spreading the wisdom. That there's nobody that hears about what's going on inside that temple, but they are doing something there.
so. And I don't know who I've mentioned. I'm sure I've mentioned to a few of you the concept in alchemy of like what is living and what is non-living. And in alchemy, they explained everything as living because everything can be composed of, in their idea, 3 ingredients, which is the body, the spirit, which is the mind, and the soul, which is that which connects you to the all. But the reason they say that even this to an alchemist would be a living thing, and the reason is because the mere existence of this thing in my life, the fact that I'm even holding this means that it's affecting my life in some way. Its presence, it's an animate presence. I'm explaining this concept to you right now through an inanimate object.
Right.
That is the life of the object, is its presence and existence in itself.
Right.
So when you say like a monk is in a consistently meditative state, like the fact that we're even talking about the possibility of a monk being in a completely meditative state his entire life, the fact that that concept even exists is what essentially gives it its life, is how that affects us.
How does that rock feel? What does it think about?
Well, we don't know.
Doesn't
That's
matter.
the perspective. It doesn't
But it
matter.
still contributes to the
Can it
universe.
affect my life?
It might not even think. Like that's just the thing. It's just be.
Is its lack of thinking as meaningful as our thinking? Does it matter?
I ultimately,
this?
on the grand
Yes.
scale of things, this is honestly like it's kind of deep and kind of dark. But honestly, I think all things are essentially meaningless, and the only thing that gives them meaning is us. Like I was talking about the concept of like a cup is like the cup isn't just a configuration of reality. The concept of the cup is just the cup. It's like if I turn this cup into a pipe to smoke out of, right? Well, is it still a cup or is it a pipe? Is it both?
You
It's
have
like-
indeed studied the Tao when you get into the cup.
It's like the perceiver
but
is
you-
defining the purpose
Objectivity.
of that
Dylan.
moment in your life.
You failed to mention the other part of the cup.
What's that? Oh, wait. The reality aspect?
No, what besides the
Yeah,
wooden
so-
cup? What is the other part of the cup that makes the cup possible?
It's the fact that it's holding something.
The space in the cup.
Because if it was a solid
cup-
cylinder, what's the use?
A cup does not exist without the space,
Oh,
of
it's
which
cuppiness.
doesn't mean
So
anything.
that's
Yeah.
it's
It's
cuppiness. But
It
yes,
waits to be
so-
occupied.
Exactly. So, it's like what I'm getting at is it's a cup, but it's only a cup if I make it a cup. If I put it on my head, it's a hat, and I'm making it a hat. The perceiver
Oh wow.
decides the purpose of everything in regards to their own personal universe, their personal life. Like this pillow was just an artboard to him and not a pillow, but it can also be what? Oh shit! Pillow.
You just change it to something.
No, put it back on your head. We all want to see
It's
it.
not destroyed. Okay, good.
So it's about
It's a hat.
the purpose that you give it.
Exactly.
Did you draw a Q on that?
Yeah, I do.
So-
Things hold the purpose that you
Tying that back
Oh,
into
like it.
magic, something he
Yeah,
was
not
saying
much
earlier
that I
about how when we were kind of almost going into climate change, So tying that back into a collective, you've got all these humans setting intentions by an intangible thing. Everything that you see around you came from inside someone's mind. It's crazy. It came from the ether, all right?
Right? Everything in this room was manufactured.
It's so wild. So that is magic, and in its essence is that it could be the magic that people, do the rituals and they're trying to create an event happening, or it could be the magic of, what he was saying, alchemy, taking particles that were in a mountain, changing those into a different form and creating a completely different form of those molecules. Like, there's a certain magic that all begins right up here with intention. It all begins with the imagination.
So this loops around to two things. One, the last thing that I was talking about the cup and how the person creates. So which came first, the idea or the cup? Right?
The idea.
So it's like,
What's the idea?
it's like, I needed the cup. So I found a thing which could hold water and gave it the purpose of the cup.
Right, like a
But
cup.
not just that. I later thought, well, I could make this cup better. I can make this cup a thermos, and this cup will now hold the heat of what I put in it. So that's also an evolution of an idea.
But that was one person that did the cup. Now we have to deal with the consequences of the cup.
What are the consequences of the cup?
What
You have a cup.
exists.
What have you created?
You have a cup. No matter what you do
It's
the
a
rest
positive
of your
consequence.
life, you will have a cup because you know the idea of the cup. The only situation I feel like that applies to is the originator of the cup. He invented it, and now it exists, and everybody else deals with the concept.
Right? Like this
So
is
it's not
about the
about
concept of the cup. This can right here is an advancement of the concept of the cup.
right. It's not about. I don't feel like it is about the concept of the cup, because the concept of the cup has its time. It came and it passed, and now we have to deal with the consequences of the idea of the cup.
So the other concept that this relates to in alchemy, it's extremely important, and I think this is the single most universal principle just out there, period. Because of our ability to take these basic particles and convert them into one substance to another substance, we also have the power to destruct. So destruct is taking what is and breaking it down into the basic universal principles. So alchemy, as I was describing, had the spirits, the bodies, and the soul. So essentially they broke it out that the bodies are the salts, the spirits are the alcohols, which by the way is where we get the term spirit for alcohol, and the soul is sulfurs. So, and I think the sulfurs were actually, I think the sulfurs were actually in the form of an oil in alchemy. But essentially, like, don't think of them as elements, think of them as basic principles. What they want to say is, if you take anything and you break it down into its simplest form, if you take everything and you break it down into its simplest form, you have one big everything. And that the single most universal principle is that all things come from one thing.
The set of all sets.
What's that?
The set of all sets.
The set of all sets. That
What?
all things are one thing.
That's actually true. If the Big Bang happened, then your particles that are in your body came from that force. Like, we're all from that force.
We're all from stardust.
So amazing, isn't it great?
Isn't it?
It's a pretty unifying thing to say.
It's a beautiful look of it.
So unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time here.
We have indeed.
Already.
So I'm gonna give you
Right?
guys.
It's been an hour.
I'm gonna give you guys a chance to say your closing statements and to summarize what it is that you feel about the topics that we've discussed. So Stephen, why don't you go ahead and summarize what you've learned from this episode?
I learned that.
What I learned in boating school today is...
I learned a lot. Yes.
Right.
No, it's
Uh,
What about you, Rem? What are your closing statements? What did you learn about magic today?
I mean, I learned, well, I've heard it from you, Justin, or Samael, before, regarding, that it's manipulating probability and chance, I think was your wording, actually.
That's how you get nerds to like magic.
Yeah, right? Yeah. No, it's very cool. It's a much more of a psychological sort of outlook on it, which I think is really cool. And
That's what you're meaning.
And I dissociated a little bit, so I'm probably going to rewatch this actually. This is really cool.
Lorelei, what would you say that you learned about magic?
I think tonight was a really good reminder to strengthen, my intention every day. To use more intention in everything I do and everyone I come into contact with, how powerful that can be. So it was really good to have the reminder to just live a more intentional life.
Because that's the source of it, right? Is your intention and your will. So
thanks,
when you
guys.
use your intention and your will, then you have a fundamentally different perspective on it. And you just use the things in your life to support those intention and will.
A single
Yeah,
conversation
absolutely.
with somebody you've never met before can change their entire life. I've done that.
It's awesome.
Ephraim, what did you learn from this episode?
I learned, I kind of had a couple, thoughts, and, little, oh, that answers a question that I had about this and that, stuff like that. Couldn't remember off the top of my head what those were.
Right? Just rewatch it. Rewatch it with your brother Ron.
Yeah.
That'll be good.
I will say, is magic, in the main simplicity of the whole picture of what magic is trying to get a mission done that you feel needs to be done through the spiritual.
That makes sense.
It's a good question.
Is that the main basis around it? Trying to get done something you think that needs to get done?
Yeah.
I think it's a tool that is what you make out of it.
But you guys you often would say like people building this building is a form of magic, right?
Yes, that's alchemy.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that though?
That's what Freemasonry is.
I mean, if you guys break magic down to everything, it would make sense. Yeah, sure, everything
the power of
technically is
creation,
magic, but it's not spiritual that magic is known to be.
It doesn't have to be. It's psychological more than anything.
That's really a much more a broadening definition of it, really. Then
It
it starts to include a lot more than just what we typically would think magic would be.
Exactly, but that's because a lot of it, especially the psychology of it, comes from the observation of practices that came from people trying to describe stuff that they didn't fully have the knowledge to understand at the time. Which is why most of it seems mystical instead of psychological.
So Dylan,
Imagination is a reflection of reality. Spirituality comes from the imagination to describe what we can't explain.
so Dylan, what would you say that you learned from this episode?
Or was it reviewed?
Personally, I think it was really good to solidify not only what I already knew, but to kind of connect the dots of things that were just kind of floating out there. I think I think it was just a good grounding to remind myself of the powers and uses of magic and having such a powerful psychological tool. It was in a sense mostly a refresher, but definitely something that helped me solidify my answers.
It's always good to talk about it, dude.
That's generally how I feel as well.
How do you feel, Jason?
I feel like I've slightly regrounded myself back into the ideas that I've been following prior to this. I've been using the power of intention pretty actively for a while, and still currently. But it's good to get that regrounding, like I said. It feels good.
Yes, it does. To explore these concepts together.
Right?
That's what I find most meaningful about all of this, is to go into these concepts together and explore them. And it's kind of, in my opinion, like exploring the Lewis and Clark, expedition out to the west. We are finding territory which nobody really has any concrete definitions about. And so we have decided to go out and explore these spiritual concepts together and to
Although-
find out what it is that it means.
Although ironically, I mean, we didn't actually end up talking about anthropology or like ancient history at all.
We will get to it next
I
time.
think
Right?
we could go.
We can do part
I
2
think
of
we
magic.
really
We can do
into
history of magic.
How to use it for
Next
healing, which I
episode
think
would
would
be
be a really big. Like if we could go in like maybe next episode for like going into like how to use it for healing, how to work with the perceptions. I think that would be a really interesting thing to go into.
I agree. Maybe that would be a good topic to talk about next time is the healing application of magic, because it's so applicable and so much more worthwhile than I think black magic to create strife in people's lives so that they grow. Ultimately, maybe the intention is that they grow from it. So why not just go straight for the growth?
Right.
It's a good question.
There's so much.
That's that concept specifically is primarily why I've been mildly an anarchist recently.
There's so much conversational potential that a part 2 would definitely be needed. I feel, and I think it'd be cool.
Yeah, I think it would be fun too. So
Let's see what we talk about.
So I think that's it for this episode. We've run our time. We're almost at an hour and 10 minutes. So anybody have anything they want to say for the outro?
Not for the real outro.
God is dead.
Oh my goodness.
Oh no. Yeah.
Okay, well we're working on that. You know, we'll resuscitate him.
Totally on the
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. But
The Catholic God's dead. The Jewish God might still be around.
oh my
Don't
goodness.
fuck with the towel.
The Tao is life, right? It's
Let's
the
not
force.
Fuck with the towel.
Let's not
Don't-
assume that at least. No.
The Tao is the force.
May the towel be with you.
It really.
May the Tao be with you.
And also with you.
Hey, this is the way.
Show me the way.
It is the way, bro.
Oh my god. This is the way.
The way.
Early 2018.
Throwbacks.
Okay, so I guess that's it. That's been hidden knowledge of the modern times for
Thank you for
November
having us.
24th.
Right?
No,
November
I'm sorry,
23rd.
November 23rd.
Yes, it's been the 23rd.
November 23rd, that's it. Hidden knowledge of the modern times. If you liked this episode, please hit subscribe, and you have all the other buttons and options available.
You can like, you can share, you can go into your browser and copy the link and send it to your friend that you
You
might
can
think
report
might
it.
find this interesting.
You can report it as sexually inappropriate.
No!
If I were to pull my meter out right now, show it from the camera, it would all automatically become a radio article.
Oh my goodness. No, we cannot
Just
publish
not
that.
scene.
We can't publish that. Do not do that.
Well, hold on. Good night, farewell, stay wonderful and stay beautiful. Have a wonderful time.
We love you.
Goodbye.
We love you, people of YouTube. Please subscribe to us.
You guys are decent. I like you guys.
We hope you lead wonderful lives and do wonderful things.
Yes, I agree with that.
Oh, I hope you have the best. And good night. This has been Hidden Knowledge of the Modern Times, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers.